Hi, everyone. This is Anatoly. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm super excited. I missed all my friends at NONS and South Korea a bit, so those are fun events that I'd love to go see everyone as soon as we can. So today I'll be talking about Solana and our high performance network. If you folks have never heard about Solana before, this is kind of a quick dive. It's a high performance blockchain. It's got a fairly big network already, about 1,500 validators. And this includes projects that have launched their own nodes to support their dApps, exchanges, folks like Circle, like USDC, folks like Jump Trading, like FTX. And it's been running for over a year. And our design and everything that we built is around this idea that you can build a high performance blockchain by optimizing the validator itself and making the validator scalable with Moore's law. So as you can see on an average day, it's handling a very large number of transactions, nearly 3,000 in this screenshot per second. So our goal is to maximize the censorship resistance and decentralization of this network. And this is a community-driven process, with us and the foundation and a lot of the folks in our community building tools and onboarding new validators. The Nakamoto coefficient is something that we care a lot about. And you can think of it as the minimum set of nodes that it takes to add up to 33%. And this is an important set because this is what guarantees liveness for the network, but also guarantees how information propagates through the network. So the larger the set is, the closer we are to this ideal that whenever somebody connects to the network, they get this information, all the blocks and all the trades and all the activity from projects like Serum, the financial information, they get it at the same time as everybody else around the world. And that's a very important thing for finance, for high frequency trading, for any kind of real-time financial applications that you might want to build. I hope everyone has had a chance to play this demo that we built. It's called Break. It's a very silly website, break.solana.com, and you can simply click the keyboard and send transactions and see them confirmed. And it demonstrates the visceral Web3 experience at the speed of Web2 to the user. And it actually shows a transaction leaving the client, getting to the network, getting replicated around the world and confirmed. And the experience is as if you're using a Web2 application. And this is something that I think is really critical for mass adoption of blockchain to kind of spread around the world. It takes users, like mass adoption really means users that are not necessarily crypto savvy. They're just normal users that are used to applications like Facebook, like Reddit, like Twitter, and they see those fast response times and those UIs. It's very hard for them to start using smart contracts if the experience is quite different. So we really wanted to make sure that this is something that is as fast and as close to Web2 as possible. One of the applications that was really something that we thought was really core to what Solana is about is central limit order books. So this is an on-chain smart contract, central limit order book style DEX, a decentralized exchange. And this Serum is the DEX built by this team from FTX. It was incubated out of FTX. And folks like Jump Trading, like Alameda Research, a lot of the famous market makers that you've heard of, they use Serum to market make and to provide liquidity in these order books, just like they do on exchanges like Binance, like Coinbase, like FTX, or even in Jump's case, like NASDAQ, like New York Stock Exchange. And to us, this is the core of finance, central limit order books. This is how price gets discovered around the world. Market makers, they synthesize the world's information and they constantly submit bid and asks and cancels, and they adjust their price information. And this is a very powerful tool because it actually requires a lot of work. You know, it takes a lot of work to analyze the world's information and to create those books. And it needs to be really, really fast and really, really cheap. So Serum, I think right now generates about 20 million transactions per day. So it's the most heaviest used, I think, DApp out there. But obviously, this is only possible this is only really possible because of how cheap and fast Solana transactions are. So Solana as a network is just a very cheap, fast messaging layer. And for it to be acceptable for something like this means that it's also possible to then scale this to a very large number of users, that applications that are user-driven are unlikely to even generate as many transactions as Serum. So thanks to Serum, we saw an explosion in a lot of the parts of the ecosystem initially coming out of DeFi. And this is probably why DeFi is the largest box. Serum is not just a set of smart contracts. What's really important about it is that the market makers that are providing liquidity, that's a very important aspect of finance, that there is an opportunity to trade at any given price for any given amount. And because it's a central limit order book, we see that slippage and fills are much, much better in that style of an exchange than things like Uniswap, automatic market makers. And those still have their place. So it really depends on what kind of asset you're trading and how fast you want to trade it, and how important is it that the price is as close to the global kind of average for prices. So DeFi has been using Serum, and a lot of these applications have built on top of Serum's liquidity. And that's been kind of a huge key driver of adoption in Solana. But not only that, you know, in the last 2 months, I think we've seen 90,000 NFTs get minted on Solana. So that's been quite a massive opportunity for growth as well. And a lot of other applications, you know, things like Kin, that's a messaging client that is the second largest used token on Solana outside of Sol. I think they do 2 to 3 million transactions per day. So if you were to compare Solana to Ethereum, we basically have all the same kinds of applications as Ethereum already up and running. So teams have formed through our hackathons and have launched these in, you know, span of 4 to 6 weeks time. What's interesting about Solana is that it's not EVM compatible at the moment. It's all these applications that are new are built in Rust from scratch. So a lot of the developers that we see that come into the space, they are not Ethereum developers switching over. They're not even new developers copying Ethereum projects. These are new developers building things from the ground up in Rust, designed for Solana specifically, and designed, in a lot of cases of DeFi, designed specifically for central limit order books. So for using Serums and Serum's liquidity. And that's a pretty important differentiator, because once you have access to, you know, better fills, better slippage, lower slippage, faster execution, and that level of finance is a competitive advantage to anyone else who doesn't have it. And you know, we've seen with that explosion of folks building DeFi applications in the ecosystem, the TVL of projects in Solana has skyrocketed quite a bit. So that's been really exciting. And these are native applications. So these are new teams that have built these projects, as I mentioned before. So the hackathons have kind of taken a life of their own. I don't know if folks remember our first hackathon. We, you know, got the chain up and running, got smart contracts were live, Serum was live already, but this was our first hackathon. We had about 1,000 teams, 1,000 people registered, about 50 teams formed and submitted a project. And we kind of seen an almost exponential explosion of this happening in Solana in the last, over the last year. So Ignition, the newest hackathon just started. So we're seeing, a crazy amount of people register, but the previous hackathon right before that, the Solana season one, had 13,000 registrations, 350 project submissions. So a lot of these teams, a lot of these people just met together for the first time during the hackathon, and they were able to come up with an idea, build an MVP, sometimes write smart contracts in Rust if those are not already there, and launch a product, an MVP, and raise funding. Oftentimes before the hackathon is even over and the judges even had a chance to vote, some of these teams have raised funding and we're basically getting to market. So that was really kind of very explosive and very exciting process. So as I mentioned, Ignition is the hackathon happening right now. If you're a developer and you are familiar with Ethereum, this is a perfect time to learn Rust and just kind of experiment. If you're an engineer that is, sitting at Google and wondering why am I still working at this giant, very successful company, this is also a perfect time to jump in and try something new and try something crazy and get a sense of what crypto's all about. And hackathons are a very light way to do it. You never know, you might build something unique and interesting that a lot of the judges will award grants or prizes to, and that could be what kickstarts, your next company. So this is not just for folks that are already in crypto or already looking to get funding and already, have an idea and everything in mind. We saw from our hackathons that a bunch of the teams that ended up raising funding in the third hackathon were actually formed the previous one and tried to build something and just had so much fun that continued building a product. So this is really an opportunity for you to make some friends, have fun. It's sponsored by some amazing companies, Microsoft, Standard Chartered Bank, Jump Trading, Forte, and Metaplex. So you get a chance to really show off what you can do to a lot of great people. A few notes on Ethereum compatibility. So Solana is its own layer one, and there's an amazing bridge called Wormhole that's been live for over a year or about a year, and it's a team that started building bridges not just to Ethereum but now to Terra and a couple other chains. And this, they just launched their version of V2, which supports arbitrary messaging passing. So you could, I think NFT bridging NFTs is going to be live in a couple of weeks, but you could also start experimenting with writing front ends to Wormhole, where you could be potentially bridging governance actions and things like that between networks. So if you're super interested in DAOs and DeFi and cross-chain, how do these things exist on cross-chain? This is a great time to also start looking through Wormhole docs and see if there's something that spikes your interest. What is really different about Solana, and this is probably simply because of me, I'm an operating systems engineer. I spent my career at Qualcomm working on things like Brew. I don't know if you remember, circa 2000, early 2000s, feature phones, LG phones that ran this little operating system. I was a kernel engineer, and building an operating system for an ARM device with 2 megabytes of RAM is a very similar experience to building a high performance blockchain where resources are very constrained. But Solana is an operating system in the general sense. So Neon is a EVM virtual machine, right? So it's an interpreter of EVM bytecode, but it runs as a Solana program. So it literally is the same thing as running Java on Windows, or the idea of Java running on Sun, on Windows, on Linux as a virtual machine. Because Solana is generic enough to be an operating system, you can do things like this. You can run EVMs, you could run other virtual machines, but I'm really excited to really see this going live for two reasons. One is that I think it's pretty important to have the ability to take contracts that have, so much product market fit on Ethereum and run them flawlessly on Solana, but also that it really showcases that Solana is limitless for developers, that maybe today it's EVM, maybe tomorrow it's Python or Java or JavaScript. It's really up to the technology and the devs that need those tools. Stable coins and payments is something that is an obvious use case for Solana and crypto networks. And this is one of those things that really shows true adoption because it requires dollars in a bank. And because of the activity that we see on the network, there's over 1.7 billion in native stablecoins issued since February 2021. This is the chart that this is the one chart that I want to see go to the moon. This is the most important one. So really excited for all the folks that are using stablecoins in Solana and the amazing team at a Circle that's been building great products, and Tether as well. So join our community. I want to thank some friends of ours in Korea, the Nonce folks that have been just always working with us and like just really fun crew of developers. Erica, who's been an amazing organizer in Korea. So thank you guys so much. Really pleasure to be here. I wish I could travel and see everybody. This is what it's doing per second. So the main difference, I think that the critical difference that folks need to understand about how Solana is designed is that the core engine of what runs Solana, its consensus and everything else, is the same engine that handles smart contracts and processes transactions. Literally votes, consensus votes, they execute smart contract transactions at pay a fee. So the network is designed to scale, not TPS really, but really the whole idea of the chain itself. And the scalability is only limited by the hardware available to the validators. So if we're so lucky that we see such massive adoption and growth that the TPS ends up being 20, 50,000 transactions per second at a steady state load. What that means is that the validators can now upgrade their hardware and increase the capacity, now going from 50,000 to maybe 200,000, because the only thing that's required for that is bandwidth and CPUs and SSDs. So all those things are organized sand that you can buy from Amazon. So decentralization is a very multifaceted term. What does that mean to us? Because the use case that we mostly care about is this idea that on this global network, that information gets propagated to everybody at the same time. Literally, like the goal of Solana is to carry transactions as fast as news travels around the world, so speed of light through fiber. And the reason why we have that goal is because who we feel we're competing with is NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange. So if some important event happens in Seoul that has importance to markets, that newswire has to propagate to a marketplace in New York, and that trader looking at that Bloomberg terminal is going to look at it after that speed of light delay. By the time you look at the market at New York Stock Exchange, that price should already be reflected on both Serum or a market like Serum and the New York Stock Exchange. So for that to happen, information in the network needs to be guaranteed to propagate as fast as possible. And the only way to do this without centralization is to optimize for this thing called the Nakamoto coefficient, which is the minimum set of nodes that are up to 33%, and to propagate the data around the network at the same time, simultaneously to all the nodes. And that really requires more hardware, requires more bandwidth. There's no other way to implement it. So it's not even a trade-off. Either you have this feature, either you're able to propagate information simultaneously around the world and give fair access to people, and anybody in the world fair access to marketplaces, or you don't have it. So this is how we think of decentralization, because it's really critical for that one piece, fair and open access to information to marketplaces around the world at the same speed as centralized exchanges. If we can accomplish that, we're really close. 400 milliseconds, it's not as fast as 80 milliseconds, but it's a lot faster than 12 and a half seconds. And that is a huge difference. That's a difference that's making Serum liquidity and slippage, be comparable to, FTX, not quite FTX and Binance, but much closer than Uniswap. So I hate the ETH killer thing, because I'm an open source developer. I grew up in the time when Linux was fighting Microsoft. And the big misconception that people have about open source projects is that it's possible to kill them. Well, if there's developers that are just having fun working on this thing over the weekend, there's nobody, it's impossible, right, to kill them, right? So there's no way to kill Ethereum, and that's basically not something that we even think about. Our goal is to make Solana, and I think we're succeeded there, an open source project that people just have fun building on the weekend in their own free time. So also unkillable, right? So that's really the goal. And the second goal, and really the advantage of what we're working on, is that we are so 100% focused on making sure that these order books that are running on Serum can be competitive with not Ethereum, but New York Stock Exchange, with NASDAQ, with the biggest retail exchanges for equities and things like that. So that, if we can accomplish that as a decentralized open source project, it's just a bunch of code in GitHub. I think that's a very interesting outcome, right? And it's worth trying. I think it was just really that we were focused on a use case that was so different from Ethereum or any other block smart contract platform out there. If you really look at other networks that are building, competitive platforms, they are designed as like a faster version of Ethereum, but not really focused on a differentiated use case that opens up a whole new thing. Because central limit order books and that level of fine-grained finance was really a core to what we're doing, the kinds of developers that we started seeing entering the Solana ecosystem initially were folks that had 5+ years working at, let's say a Chicago options trading firm in C++. They're very naturally, engineers that can switch to Rust in about a weekend, and they already know what they want to build. And the only place that they could have built that was on Solana using Serum, working with Jump Trading or Alameda as a liquidity provider. And it was just no other place for them to go. And we were able to open up that new set of developers to come in and initially kind of kickstart the ecosystem. And that was really kind of the tip of the spear, because once you have a group of people that are, having fun building products and launching really quickly, other use cases that you could launch in other chains, but also work great on Solana, are just kind of hop along and start building as well. So NFTs was, really an explosion of NFTs. 90,000 NFTs got minted through Metaplex over the last 2 months. So we're pretty excited about that. So we really see the DeFi as almost like the tip of the spear, and kind of where a lot of engineers first start thinking about products in DeFi, but because of the success there, really builds a lot of the user-facing tools that people need for everything else. it becomes very easy to adopt it into every other application, gaming, NFTs and payments included.